This road is now private HOA property, Mr. Callahan. Your access has been revoked. The words, dripping with a smug finality that curdled the crisp mountain air, came from a woman who looked like she'd been poured into a beige pantsuit and left to set. She was standing beside a newly installed, brutally functional steel gate that now bisected the gravel road leading to my cabin, a clipboard clutched in her hand like a scepter. Her name, I would soon learn, was Karen, and she was the president of the Aspen Creek Estates Homeowners Association, a title she wore with the gravity of a four-star general. The gate wasn't just a barrier, it was a declaration of war. It was thick, black, and embedded in concrete footings that looked deep enough to anchor a battleship, effectively cutting me off from the only piece of the world that was truly mine. A cabin my grandfather built with his own hands on land our family had owned for a century. This was the moment my retirement, a future I'd envisioned as quiet mornings with coffee and the scent of pine, turned into a war. If you've ever dealt with an HOA from hell, or a power-tripping bureaucrat who thinks a laminated ID badge makes them a god, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you have your own nightmare story, I want to hear it. You are not going to believe how this ends, because this wasn't just about a gate. It was about a fundamental lie, and I was the only one who held the truth. I let my eyes drift from her self-satisfied face to the gate, then to the freshly strung barbed wire fence that stretched into the woods on either side, brutally stapled to old-growth pines. My truck, a reliable old Ford I'd had for 15 years, idled behind me, its engine a low grumble of protest. Inside my gut, the familiar, cold calm that had served me well through 2 tours as an Army Corps of Engineers officer settled in. Panic is a luxury. Assessment is a necessity. Karen mistook my silence for shock, for the intimidated compliance she was clearly used to. The board voted unanimously, she continued, puffing up her chest. This road has been a liability, unregulated traffic, potential for property damage. We're securing our community assets. You'll have to find an alternative route to your property. Her smile was a thin, bloodless slash. The absurdity of it was breathtaking. An alternative route? The only other way to my land was a 3-day hike over a mountain ridge or a helicopter. She knew that. That was the whole point. This wasn't about security, it was about control. It was a land grab, pure and simple, executed with the cheap authority of a neighborhood committee. I killed the engine, the sudden silence of the forest pressing in. I got out of my truck, the door closing with a solid, definitive thud. I was a tall man, and years of service had kept me lean, a stark contrast to her doughy, entitled posture. I walked slowly towards the gate, not looking at her, but at the welds, the thickness of the steel, the professionally installed keypad and lockbox. They'd spent some serious money on this. HOA money. Money from the very people who lived in the development down the road, a development that only existed because my grandfather sold the acreage to a developer 30 years ago. I ran a hand over the cold metal. You've made a mistake, I said, my voice quiet, flat. Her condescending smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. The only mistake, Mr. Callahan, was the previous board's failure to formalize the association's ownership of this access road, a mistake we have now corrected. She tapped her clipboard. It's all here, duly filed, completely legal. I finally turned to look at her, to really look at her. In her eyes, I saw the petty, grasping hunger of a small person given a taste of small power. She saw a lone cabin owner, an outsider she could bully. She didn't see an engineer who understood land and law better than she understood her own bloated budget. She didn't see a man whose entire family history was written on the survey map she was pretending to have read. And she certainly didn't know the one, single, cataclysmic fact that would ultimately bring her little empire crashing down around her ears. The road she had just illegally gated, the road she was calling an HOA asset, had never been sold. It was mine. The entire 2-mile stretch of it, from the county highway all the way up to my cabin, and right past the entrance to her precious Aspen Creek Estates. They didn't own the road. They had a limited easement to use it, and she had just given me all the justification I would ever need to burn that easement to the ground. The drive back to the small town where I kept a modest rental apartment was a study in controlled fury. The cold calm I'd felt confronting Karen was a trained response, a lid clamped tight on a boiling pot. Now, alone in my truck, I let the pressure build. Every detail of the encounter replayed in my mind. The smug tilt of her head, the professionally printed "no trespassing" sign already bolted to the gate, the sheer unadulterated arrogance of it all. She had called the road a community asset. The phrase echoed, each repetition stoking the fire. My grandfather, a man who spoke little but meant every word, had a saying, "Never sell the path to your own front door." He'd been a surveyor in his youth before starting a small lumber business. A man who understood that land wasn't just dirt and trees. It was a complex web of rights, access, and history. When the developer came calling in the late 80s, eager to buy the sprawling meadowlands below his mountain cabin, my grandfather had been shrewd. He sold them the 100 acres they wanted, land that would become Aspen Creek Estates. But in the deed of sale, a document I knew was resting safely in a bank vault, he had carved out one very specific exception: the 2-mile gravel road. He didn't just reserve an easement for himself, he retained full, unencumbered ownership of the road itself, granting the future development a simple, revocable right-of-way. He knew that one day the people in the fancy houses might forget who came first, and he'd be damned if he'd let them lock him out of his own mountain. That gate wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a desecration of my grandfather's foresight. It was an insult to his memory. Karen and her board hadn't just blocked a road. They had tried to rewrite history with a steel gate and a lie. My first stop wasn't a lawyer's office. It was the county records office, a dusty, quiet place that smelled of old paper and bureaucratic patience. I wanted the official, county-filed plat maps first. I spent an hour with the clerk, a helpful older woman who seemed to enjoy the puzzle, pulling up the original subdivision plat for Aspen Creek Estates. And there it was, clear as day on the oversized map, a thick, bold line denoting the property boundary. The 100-acre subdivision was neatly contained, a perfect box, and running along its entire western edge, distinctly outside that box, was a shaded strip labeled Private Access Road, Parcel 7B. Parcel 7B. My parcel. The road wasn't a shared driveway or a common area. It was a separate, legally defined piece of property. The HOA's land began where my road ended. A wave of grim satisfaction washed over me. This was the cornerstone. From there, I went to the bank. The safe deposit box felt cool in my hands. Inside, nestled among old family photos and my honorable discharge papers, was a thick manila envelope. The original deed of sale, the survey my grandfather had commissioned, in the easement agreement. I spread them out on the small table in the viewing booth, the fluorescent light glinting off the notary seals. The legal language was dense, but the intent was crystal clear. It granted the Future Homeowners Association of the Aspen Creek Development and its successors the right to ingress and egress over the road for residential purposes only. It said nothing about ownership. It said nothing about the right to erect barriers, to control access, or to declare it private HOA property. In fact, it contained a specific clause my grandfather must have insisted on. Said easement is contingent